Hey, before we get into today's episode of Comics Are Dope, a couple of things. Clearly, you saw from the title that today I'm talking to Tad Stones, the creator of one of my childhood heroes, Darkwing Duck. And this conversation was in support of the Darkwing Duck Kickstarter from Dynamite Entertainment. There are 3 graphic novels that you can grab in oversized deluxe hardcover or in trade paperback editions. Now, as you're listening to this, you're going to hear us reference the fact that you've only got hours left to back. And that was true. The main campaign did end on July 3rd. But at the time of this intro recording on July 10th, 2024, they are allowing for late pledges. So consider this your last warning. I have no idea how long they're going to be accepting pledges. But if you want to get the Darkwing Duck hardcovers, you can go to comicsaredope.com/Darkwing and make your pledge. Get those last orders in, because when they're gone, they're gone. And now let's talk to Tad Stones. Well, guys, today's guest probably needs no introduction. I feel like we say that a lot. But this man has had an acclaimed career, writing, story editing, producing, directing, TV and film animation. He's responsible for such works as Hercules, the animated series. You might know Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers, or I don't know, if you're watching this, maybe you're familiar with a certain Drake Mallard or Darkwing Duck. And of course, here to talk about Darkwing Duck is his creator, Mr. Tad Stones. Welcome to the show.
Hey, happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Although
I always like to, I got to say, I always point out, or I try to point out, that by WGA rules, Writers Guild Association, because I was the showrunner and the initial idea guy and all that, I'm definitely classified as the creator. But really, it took my whole crew and obviously the talented Jim Cummings and my writers, my story editors, my voice caster, and all that. It does take a village to make a cartoon, and those were these prime days of the Disney afternoon, and we had great teams. And I was lucky that my team kind of moved from one of my shows to another, and everybody brought new stuff to Darkwing Duck. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, no, I can't imagine anyone doing it all of their own, right? Like we're not gonna Bob Kane this scenario, but so I had a conversation, a chat with Greg Weisman a couple months ago. And I guess I'll start this one the same way. In that I don't want to make you feel old, but
it's okay. Life has already done that.
That's what he said.
And my grandkids, for that matter. Yeah.
So I talk a lot about like how I got into superheroes and comics and the like. And most of it revolves around the fact that when I was in daycare, we watched way too much TV. So a lot of my earliest memories are sitting in front of a TV set, watching Power Rangers, X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman the Animated Series, but also the Disney Afternoon, which included the show with my favorite theme song and character, Darkwing Duck. And so much of just early childhood for me included Darkwing. My mother bought the VHS from Target, if I remember correctly, because I begged for it. It was the 2-part episode or TV movie or however they decided to designate it, Just Us Justice Ducks.
If I could reach it without killing myself standing on a revolving chair, I'd reach up and show it to you.
So we lost the clamshell long ago, but she still has it in one of those like black VHS holders. I played that tape out. And what's funny is I didn't realize until just recently how much of Darkwing I never saw as a kid. Because most of the time I just popped in that VHS because I could watch it whenever I wanted.
Yeah.
And then, when I'm at daycare, whatever episode is on TV at the time is what I saw. But there's like 90 episodes of Darkwing Duck.
91, yeah.
there's a lot out there. And so I've been enjoying going through it with my 3-year-old when she'll sit still. And and I love that we can just kind of pick out any episode. But yeah, I just had to tell you that you're part of my formative years. Just Darkwing Duck is such a thing for me.
That's fantastic.
Thanks. But I like to start these interviews out at the beginning, trying to get some backstory. So obviously you don't just stumble into a career in animation. Um, what was it that kind of
Although
sparked you?
I
Oh,
actually, there was some stumbling going on. It was a
oh,
lot of luck, is what it ended up being. I mean,
oh.
I loved comics. I love cartoons. And what was nice, my dad had wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist, like an editorial cartoonist.
Hmm,
He graduated college having been a cartoonist on a humor paper at USC, doing cartoons for the Daily Trojan. Although those he had to carve in a linoleum block, so can't really work on your style much that way. But when he graduated, it was less about chasing your dreams and more about, putting food on the table.
hmm,
So he ended up in advertising. But in the meantime, he had this collection of art books, not just classic art books, but cartooning books. I
hmm,
had the famous artist cartoonist course, which is, by Milt Caniff, Al Capp, Harry Higginson, Willard Mullen, all these fantastic classic cartoonists. I grew up with that. That was like a storybook I read, was going through these classes. Learning to draw
wow.
was included word balloons and how to draw a panel and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Uh, he also had books on animation, like this one. You can see what condition it's in, held together
Wow.
by clips. Uh, when I went to Disney, I think every young animator had this book, which have
Hmm,
not only the basics of animation, but the basics of character designs and, the goofy character, the cute character, but things like this, like line of action in
hmm,
animation and how to make a more powerful drawing. Um, we all had that book, but I had it at an early age. So I just loved all that stuff. Um, so I wanted to do it. And at the same time, I was sucked into, comics. Uh, and then in my high school years, I kind of thought the only place worth working at would be Disney, because they were the only ones in town doing full animation. All of
hmm,
television was done by, you know, limited animation that was, you know, done limited because of the commercial. I mean, you couldn't do full animation; it was too expensive.
hmm,
Uh, so I thought, that's the only place worth working. They have their guys, and frankly, when I was in high school, that was close to the truth. That
hmm,
you're talking about many of the great animators were still there. Um, and in fact, for the long time, Roy Disney Sr. wanted to shut down animation way
hmm,
back when. He said,
hmm,
look, if we just do 7 movies, we can just keep re releasing them. And Walt had different ideas. But then when Walt got sidetracked into Disneyland, and that was a whole new world of creativity, the animators kind of thought our time here is limited. That Walt basically had the feeling of, so I've been told anyway, that these guys started the business with me, started the company with me. Let's continue it until they reach retirement age or whatever. Well, Walt died before that time, and
hmm.
they all braced themselves for kind of, here it goes. But luckily, one of the you know Walt died during Jungle Book, I guess. Um, but they kept going. They let him keep doing movies, and then they did Robin Hood, which actually made so much money that management took notice, um, and said, because by this time Roy Disney Sr. again had died, management said, this is actually the core of our business, and things sprout from it, and it made a lot of money, this Robin Hood
Hmm.
thing. So what are you guys doing to train new people? And it went like, train, okay. I didn't know it, but basically in my later high school years and in my college years, they started a training program that was basically Eric Larson, one of the 9 old men of Disney. And he would just work with these trainees that would come in. So the review board, again, largely made up of these guys, of the classic animators that you can find in every book on animation, um, would look at portfolios and get them in. The only way I found out about that is the girl I was dating at the time was sweet mates with a daughter of an old animator who is currently designing rides at what is now Imagineering. Back then it was just WED.
Mm.
Uh, and so she said, "Hey, there's this training program. You should try out for that." I went, "What training program?" So she got the contact for me. I made the call basically to find out information, and the call ended with, "Okay, so you can come in next Thursday or Thursday in 2 weeks." It was not a long period of time, especially since at the time I was not an art major.
Mm.
I hadn't been an art major since freshman year, and all my English teachers wanted me to go to English because of my writing. And I ended up in something called the humanities, which I thought was like a design your own major, so I could combine both.
Mm.
The end result is I never took a writing course. And all my art courses kind of turned into 3D stuff like ceramics and all that, although
Mm.
that paid off ultimately because suddenly I had to put together a portfolio. I was a TA in ceramics. My ceramics teacher that I was assisting had just taken over the art department because the head was on sabbatical. Huge Disney fan. So he made sure I could sit in on all the life drawing classes so I could quickly put together a portfolio.
Mm.
Uh, so I took my stuff in. They gave notes. I came back a few days later with extra drawings. A lot of that, some of the action drawings, the sports drawings were basically exaggerations that I'd learned from that famous artist cartoonist course.
Mm.
And I was accepted. So I started at Disney 3 days after graduation. And the manager of the department said, "Are you sure you want to start now? Because if you get accepted, it'll be a year before you get a vacation." And I said, "I'm not going to enjoy any vacation until I know whether I'm in or not."
Right.
So you had 4 weeks to do a animation test, basically because of that book I showed you and general knowledge and the art of animation by Bob Thomas, which was a Disney book. I knew the basics. I could work with Eric and actually get started on my thing. My first test was just an alligator standing up on two legs in a pirate hat and kind of doing a little jig, and then he threw up a sword and caught it with his tail. And as rough as it was, as basic as it was, the review board felt like they'd gotten a feeling of personality from this gator, and that's what they cared about.
Mm.
My second one was way more ornate. Parts of it were way stiffer, but I survived that. And then I went into production as an in-betweener. And I was so bad as an in-betweener, almost got fired. So my career could have been very short.
Mm.
Uh, anyway, that's how I got into Disney animation. I started in features, and that girlfriend is now my wife. So that worked out too. And,
Nice.
I stayed at Disney until they showed me the door at 2003, I think. And then I had another 10 years in animation, doing a couple of Hellboy animated movies and a movie for Netflix and a new Adventures of Brer Rabbit at Universal Pictures. So I had the gamut in Disney and outside of Disney.
So, I mean, you were a part of Disney during, what is now known as the sort of Disney animation renaissance, right? For me, that was just like for me growing up, you either had the Disney house or the not Disney house. So I grew up in the Disney house. And like, if I wanted to watch like a Don Bluth feature, my cousins had those. But like my
Uh-huh.
mom was going to the store, getting whatever the newest Disney movie was, whatever was coming out of the vault. We went to Disney World several times in my
Mhm.
childhood, and it was just Disney ran the world as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I was actually there. I came in just before the Renaissance because the guy who was in the training program like 5 months before me,
mm,
the previous trainee, was Ron Clemens. And Ron and John Musker, of course, did Little Mermaid and
mm,
Aladdin and Princess and the Frog and Treasure Planet and Moana. And, you know, they were a huge part of that Disney Renaissance. So we came in, it was still these, I started working for Wooly Reitherman, and because I got to move into story, even though I was moved up to assistant animator.
Mm.
And then, I had one scene in The Rescuers, but on Fox and Hound, I got to do story. I mean, it's uncredited, but um, that's right. Things changed. Wooly left. There was a new directing team, and that's about when I was moved over to Imagineering and worked on the Imagination Pavilion, and before that, the Transportation Pavilion with Ward Kimball. And you talk about a great animator with a ton of stories. I wish I had taken notes the entire time. So basically, I was in one of the founding fathers of TV animation. That was started when Michael Eisner came in. And about that same time is when Ron and John were working on Little Mermaid. And in fact, they gave me an early script to read because I shared an office with Ron. And they say, well, here's somebody who knows animation, but totally disconnected from the department. And Ron lives not too far from me. Nice. So it was like, so I really feel like the Bluth picture, Feifel, and the Spielberg picture kind of kicked Disney in the pants, made them say, hey, here's stuff that they made a lot of money on this. That's right when Disney management came or changed. And they looked at animation as this is making movies. So animation had these bizarre ways of being done in features, like, well, we don't use scripts. We kind of work out an outline. We explore it visually. And it was like, there are strengths to all of that. But when you're talking about story arcs, character development, all of that, it's like, cinema's been around for 100 years. We kind of have ways that actually work. And they brought in the idea of, and I mean, Ron and John did a script, not only a script, but they brought in the idea of let's bring an editor on at the beginning of the process so that an editor using story reels can start building a movie and can say things like, I could make this cut better if I had this kind of scene. Well, go down the hall and some artists would draw up that kind of scene. And they really could develop it. I think the movies became more cinematic, not just in composition, but just the actual process. They really became movie makers because, and Ron Clements was the one who pointed it out when Don Bluth was still at Disney. He once gave a talk and he was saying, like, to the various trainees and the young people about you should go and see mimes. You should see plays and watch how actors play to the back of the audience and all that. And Ron came out of one of those meetings and said to me, he never talks about movies. He talks about plays. He talks about this, but we're making movies. It's literally film, projected onto a screen for people to watch. And I think that changed in a major way, again, when these movie makers came to Disney and brought that sensibility to it. So anyway, that was what was going on at Features. I had been around designing rides. I came back, then I went to consult on TV. There was about a year and a half that I wondered what I was doing and how I was getting a paycheck. And then ended up in this first meeting about TV animation and didn't go right away. Went back to Features. And then I was actually thinking of leaving the company when I ran into one of the guys from who was starting at TV animation, one of the executives. He said, oh, you should come and visit. And I came and visited, and he's kind of introducing me as, yeah, Ted's going to be coming over here. It's like, I didn't say anything, but I'm going, I never said that. But had a meeting with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and he said, Ted, it's not a one-way street. If it doesn't work out, but right now they could really use you. Well, it's pretty much a one-way street. But it didn't matter. I was actually better suited for television instead of doing one. I mean, my life had gone a different path, who knows? But instead of doing one story for 4 years, I was doing many stories. So about one character, one group of characters. But I enjoyed working with people on new stories and fresh ideas and all that. It just suited me better. So there's a couple stumbled in there. If I had dated a different person, I never would have found out about the training program. If I
Wow.
had been, I don't know, a better in-betweener, maybe I wouldn't have moved into story. And it's because of these weird projects I did that I was invited to that first meeting about TV animation and then invited to join TV animation.
Man, that's wild. It's crazy to think about just kind of the paths we take and where they lead, even when we don't
Yeah.
know it. Um, but I guess something that's been central to this theme, right? You're talking about story and whether it's feature films, stage productions, rides. You talked about rides, working on rides, and
Mm-hmm.
then television. Like it's all story, but then you got to sort of change it to fit whatever the medium is.
Yeah.
How easy is that to do?
Well, things are each is a whole different type of storytelling. I mean, when rides, they'll often talk about the old guys would talk about rides as in like go through the Pirates of the Caribbean, and they would describe, well, here's this scene, and then here's the governor being dumped in a well while his wife is saying doesn't want him to give up the treasure, and
Mm,
they talk it through as a storyline. But the reality is, you're sitting in a boat, and most of the audience is doing this.
right.
So things have to read in a different way, but that also
Mm,
means they can go through the ride a second time, and this time they're looking at different angles and stuff like
mm,
that. So it's kind of a different type of storytelling. Um, the I remember the Michael Webster, who was I think president or chairman of the division at the time. Whatever his He was head of TV animation. He reported to Gary Kreisel, who eventually took over that spot. Um, but Gary was in charge of all television at the time. Uh, he said, "Tad, you're going to come over here, and and all I can say is television animation is entirely different from features, and then you're going to be here about a year, and you still won't realize how different it is."
mm,
Um, and to some extent, that was true. And part of it was, although it didn't take me a year, I think, to catch on, but part of it is just the pace and terms of thinking, how fast you have to move. Now, my advantage is because of my background in animation and storyboarding, um, and not just storyboarding. In fact, we weren't back then storyboarding from a script. You were conceiving of gags and emotional moments that you then cobbled together into a scene and then
mm,
got input from directors and animators, and it grew organically that way. But when I went to start writing scripts, I was mentally storyboarding them. So I was very careful of not being too wordy, not trying to describe too much for each shot, really protecting the eventual storyboard artist and the animator from putting too much in or making the script too long.
mm,
Because I pointed out to somebody who one of my actually it was on a Darkwing Duck project, and one of the notes I gave was this script is way too long because they were going by page count. And I said, you have a sequence here where they sneak into a building. Well, a director is going to want to play that out and have them
mm,
sneak into the building. The music's going to be tense. They're going to be peeking around corners. They're going to tiptoe through here. That's still going to eat up time. And that's going to take up way more time than all these pages of words that you have here.
mm.
Uh, so, I mean, it does take a while to get used to that. And I was lucky it was kind of bred into me.
Gotcha. Nice.
Mhm.
And so, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, right, the cause for this occasion, why we're here. Um, Dynamite Entertainment currently holds the rights to Darkwing Duck in comics. They've been
Mhm.
publishing Darkwing comics for the last year and a half or so. But right now, they have a Kickstarter campaign going. If you're listening to this or watching this as it premieres, then you've got about 5 hours left to back this campaign. And what it's going to collect are several iterations of Darkwing Duck in comics. So there is the sort of classic collection, which will include the four-issue Disney Comics limited series from 1991, as well as a series I didn't know existed until this campaign, which is the Marvel Disney Afternoon comic.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
were 10. Go ahead.
I didn't know it existed either. I was in Agrabah at the time, dealing with genies and flying carpets, uh, and I've yet to see it. But people have mentioned that, oh, three of those issues
Mm.
they put Darkwing in a human world.
Huh.
Not even dog noses, and it's my feeling is always, there was a cartoon show you could have watched. Footnote. So I'm looking forward to that collection, just out of curiosity and a little bit of dread.
Right, because I own the Disney Comics, the 91 series, but I've never
Mm-hmm.
seen that Disney Afternoon comic. And apparently it was an anthology. So kind of like I've got a Fantagraphics collection here of different Disney Afternoon adventures, and you would get like
Yeah,
Chip and Dale and Tailspin and all the things in one book. And so this Darkwing collection, of course, is only going to collect the Darkwing stories from those 10 issues, which is fine with me. Um, but so that's one collection. Another collection is going to collect the 10 issue Amanda Dibert and Carlo Loro series that Dynamite published last year. And then the third collection, I believe it's called Heroes and Villains, but that's going to collect the Justice Duck series, which is still ongoing. It might just be wrapping
yeah.
up this week.
I think it's still got a few issues to go because I know I haven't read them yet.
Got
So,
you. So yeah, it's a Justice Duck series by Roger Langridge, also with Carlo Loro on art. So same as the previous Darkwing series, and then the Negaduck series by Jeff Parker. I believe that's going to run 8 issues, which are still ongoing as we speak.
yeah.
Um, and those, by the way, have been outstanding comics. Of course, I've been collecting them all in single issues, and I'm still having a hard time. Like, okay, am I gonna just back for all 3 hardcovers? Because when am I gonna see these again? Uh,
Yeah. Come
you
on, you
know,
got to go hardcover. Come on.
right. I
I mean,
definitely gotta go
what I
hardcover.
loved, it really surprised me. I mean, I had nothing to do with any of this.
Mhm.
Licensees come and go, but I just assumed they were putting out a Darkwing Duck comic, and then suddenly they announce, Negaduck, and then
Mhm.
Justice Ducks, and so that just showed a commitment on Dynamite's part to say, no, we're hitting this in a big way. This is not just one thing. We'll see how it does. I mean, you're still going to have to see how it does, but
Right.
the Kickstarter helps. The What I like is on the Heroes and Villains book,
Mhm.
Jeff Parker did Negaduck, and he tweaked him a little from what we did. Negaduck
Mhm.
was pretty one note for us, and that was the fun of him. But Jeff said, wait, this guy is an evil reflection of Darkwing, so there should be more Darkwing in it. And
Mhm.
that's what he did. You can see this is an amoral Darkwing, or an
Right.
immoral Darkwing, I suppose, that he still has Darkwing's huge ego, and it just
Mhm.
fleshes him out more. And he did he created a bunch of new villains to play Negaduck off of, because that's how you show what a villain's like, is to give
Right.
him more villainous adversaries.
Mhm.
So that little tweak to his personality was great. Uh, but the big surprise for me actually was Roger Langridge's Justice Ducks,
Mhm.
because Carlo did the artwork, but he changed his art style for that one, which I
Mhm.
think actually is, to me, much stronger and certainly fits what Roger is doing, because Roger's one of the funniest. He does art, he writes, one of the funniest guys in comics, and comedy in comics is harder than people think. I mean,
Mhm.
just there's no put a line out and wait for applause. There's you don't have the same kind of timing,
Right.
and he, uh, in my opinion, um, has done the closest to a classic Donald Duck or Uncle Scrooge comic. Back in the Carl Barks era, in
Mhm.
that he gets into these stories in like a page and a half or less. It just boom, he sets it up, you're in it, and most of them, at least the first half that I've read, are
Mhm.
standalone comics.
Yeah.
There's not even continuity in the Darkwing series that Amanda did. There's an ongoing story, um, but in this, a lot of standalones. You just pick one up and enjoy it, and every page is chock full of humor and gags, both
Mhm.
dialogue, visually. It's probably my favorite of the three series.
Yeah, and Carlo loves throwing in Easter eggs for people who watch the
Mm-hmm.
shows. Um, it's been awesome. I really do like the way that Negaduck and Justice Ducks kind of play off each other. Because like you said, it's really like that sort of dark opposite. So where Darkwing has the outsized ego and is like, I don't need a team, like I got this, keep the camera on me.
Yeah.
Negaduck is very much the same way. So through this series, he is out to prove like why he's the greatest villain, as
Hmm.
Darkwing is also trying to prove that he's the greatest hero while having to concede that, he works better with a team. And so
What's fun is Jeff created all these other villains who are like hanging out they're like interdimensional guys who are
mhm,
basically hanging out in this universe because it's relatively safer. And so
mhm,
they're basically showing around this cool hideout that they have, and they're playing cards and whatever. And Darkwing has a fit and he says something like, evil isn't a hobby. It's a life, it's a commitment. It was just, it's it's so funny to have that spirited speech
right,
about evil.
right,
It's just, they're all fun comics. They've all done some. What I keep pointing out about Amanda's run on Darkwing is that she really gets, she gets to go through, because she has more issues, a
mhm,
lot of the Darkwing villains, but she really nailed Morgana
mhm,
Macabre. Really made her stronger than she was in a lot of the series. Um, I keep pushing for a 6-issue limited series of each of the Justice Ducks, except for
mhm,
Darkwing. Let them shine, because each one could be a totally different feeling and comic. Go from supernatural stories. I mean, in the series, we played around with Universal monsters and
mhm,
a little bit of Lovecraft, classic stuff. Whereas my feeling is, no, let Morgana get into like Steve Ditko, Doctor Strange,
mhm,
and go through Neil Gaiman's Sandman and see, is there anything about the endless I can do a duck version of, and
mhm,
just do more of a. I mean, it has to be okay for kids, but more of a little horror tinge that you put. It's, what it could be like, although not with the Universal side, but Abbott and Costello meeting Frankenstein. You have these
mhm,
comedic characters at the
right.
center with monsters chasing them, but here's a chance to really get creepy or Twilight Zone-ish. This is what people say. Hey, Ted, would you like to do some comics? And I've done some covers for them, but it's
Mhm,
like, no, this is what I like doing. I like coming up with stories. I want to bounce off of a writer and then let them do all the work. It's just like, I just want to spit out a bunch of ideas. You don't have to take them, but
mhm,
just let me have that fun and hear what you have to say, and let me see if I can plus that. And
right.
that's frankly what I miss most about my career in animation is
Mhm.
the people I got to work with, the talented crews, artists and writers.
And you shouted out the crews behind Darkwing Duck at the top of the conversation. But I did want to ask just sort of how things came about. You kind of got dragged into animation, and then you end up, as a creator on this show. But maybe what happens in between?
The When I moved to, I mean, I had that meeting on at TV Animation, the first one. It was actually at Michael Eisner's house on a
Mm,
Sunday, but it was the end of his first week he was there, so it really showed how he thought television animation was important, because he felt, look, animation is the heart of Disney. It should, everywhere there is animation, Disney should be there.
mm,
It's not all going to be equal, but wherever you are, they should be top of the line.
mm,
Um, so I was at that meeting and I had pitched things. And the reason I was at the meeting is that a lot of those people came from the licensing side, or because they had pitched television projects before with previous management. So I had done some work for them and had stuff to show actually from those meetings that I could then pitch. But then I went back to whatever I was doing. Uh, and thought I was, when I was considering leaving the company and just freelancing storyboarding, and then my idea was, well, then that'll pay the bills, and then I can write science fiction short stories or whatever to feed
mm,
my soul. Um, I talked to, the executive who was at that meeting, and he invited me over, and suddenly I'm sucked in on that side. Um, I was technically management when I first went there, a creative manager. So really, my job should have been calling up agents, bringing in writers from the outside, taking their pitches, and then presenting them.
Mm.
I didn't know that. I was too dumb. So all I knew, I was saying like, oh, it's up to me to come up with some ideas. And I felt, even though that's the way Hollywood worked, because I had just worked within Disney,
Mm.
the idea that somebody would write up something and all this detail without being paid just struck me as wrong. That can't be the way it works. So
Mm.
we had these gong shows where a lot of things are pitched to management with just 2 or 3 lines. And I remember one that came up and we pitched 23 items, and I think 18 were mine. But they were just one-liners. Like the one I remember is Trojan birds and Legionnaire cats. And it was just kind of a road. And thank God they didn't take that idea, because trying to come up with a full season, who knows? But it was like Roadrunner and Coyote, except my idea is that the birds were up in these giant trees. That's where the city of Troy was. And then the cats were legionnaires. And it was just that kind of broad action gags. But that's as simple as you would pitch. And they would just go gong or ask a few questions about it or whatever.
Mm.
So anyway, that got things I pitched, so I didn't know anybody on the outside to bring in. But that put me there. I was working with the crews that Gummi Bears had been created by Jim Magon and Art Vitello. Art Vitello is the director, and really, I think, worked closely with Jim, and Jim got a lot of his animation knowledge from Art. They did two seasons with NBC. NBC wanted to change, and suddenly I was christened as "Who do we got in the room, Dad?" Mm. I'm literally the only one in the room. So suddenly I thought just the story editor on Gummies, but I was partnered up with Alan Zaslav, who had come from UPA and Warner Brothers, and throughout the industry, had all sorts of credits. And we jumped into the third season of Gummies, and still storyboards came through me so I could check the story, and I would always add in gags or suggest drawings. And then I got to the end, they say, we're going to make you co-producer. And my response was, I would have given different notes. If I was a producer, I tried to keep it down here. So we did one season of that, and then developed Rescue Rangers, and that was my first full-on show that I was in charge of. And then after that, Darkwing. And then after that, because of my feature background, I went through many of the spin-off shows like Aladdin, Hercules, Buzz Lightyear, Star Command, a little bit of Atlantis, So all that.
Nice. No, I remember all of those vividly. Buzz Lightyear of Star Command used to come on in the mornings, or at least I guess reruns, I don't know, but it came on weekday mornings. And if Buzz Lightyear of Star Command was on, that means we were late for school.
There you go.
So
I was told once by Lin-Manuel Miranda, I was at San Diego Comic-Con behind the scenes with the guys from DuckTales, and Lin was, the voice of Gizmo Duck. And they introduced Lin to me as if I was the star. And Lin said, I used to run, he didn't run home. He'd leave school and he would run top speed to his friend's house because he couldn't make it to his home in time to catch DuckTales and Darkwing in the Disney afternoon. And he actually said that the line in Darkwing, he called it a triple rhyme, but it was, when you're in trouble, you call DW.
Right.
He says that's a direct line from that to some of the lyrics he did in The Heights, his first musical on Broadway. So that was pretty awesome. But he loved that show, and he was one of those guys who said, you made my childhood. So I felt damn good after that.
As you should. Yeah, listen, you made my childhood too. I mean, I don't have all the accolades of a Lin-Manuel Miranda, but it's just funny, like, I don't know, talking to all sorts of different people, you don't realize kind of how small the world around some of your favorite things could be. Because I was talking to Greg, he was talking about Gummi Bears and the brand confusion between Gummi Bears and Care Bears. And it's funny because I'm like, I remember being a kid and seeing bears on TV and being like, oh, never mind. And like, he's like, yeah, people didn't give the show a chance. And I'm like, dang, that's me. I'm people.
Hmm.
And then, but yeah, like you don't realize like just how small that world is. And I don't know, it makes you grateful, I guess, as a fan, as a viewer, that, creative people are in these positions and persist and keep working, you know? But yeah, I remember Buzz Lightyear Star Command. I remember the Aladdin animated series because, again, I don't know why I remember everything by like the time it would come on, but Aladdin would be on like early mornings. Little Mermaid would come on and then Aladdin, if I'm remembering correctly. But it was like if we got to daycare early enough, we would get like two breakfasts and we could watch Aladdin while eating the first breakfast. Then when the kids came in, at the regular time, I guess they had parents that worked normal hours. And
So you were like hobbits? You had like second breakfasts and
right.
yeah.
Listen, man, my mom worked like across town. So it was like everywhere we
Hmm.
went, we were there early and picked up late. So,
Oh yeah.
but yeah, so I remember the Aladdin animated series. I remember The Return of Jafar, because I feel like I saw that before I saw Aladdin. Um, but we had the
Well, that would make
VHS.
sense because it was released on tape before the Aladdin series came out. It was made to introduce the Aladdin series,
Mm,
but when Jeffrey saw the original animation, because the first half was done by Australian studios, who were great,
mm,
and it started with a Howard Ashman song, Arabian Nights,
mm.
and this great horse animation going across the deserts with the music swelling. Jeffrey turned around and he said, "Guys, this is looking pretty good." And he got into its head. He says, "Look, this has to be different features. We can't charge the same amount." But he said, "This has to be finished as an A movie," meaning I got to work with guys who had literally won the Academy Award for sound design on Twister.
Wow.
Um, and I learned all sorts of, you know, music editing and sound effects editing
Mm,
ideas from them. I having already done it on my previous shows, but it was like a whole different level.
mm.
Um, so that was anyway. So Return of Jafar was released early, so that actually would be true. You probably did see it before Aladdin, the series.
Got you. But yeah, no, I love the series. Not to go too far on a detour, but I feel like, I don't know, a lot of like the sort of sequels or like made for TV movies that come from, these big features, they're hit and miss. It's like, sometimes you feel like there's more story to be told. Other times it just feels like they just wanted to tell another story so people would buy it. The Aladdin animated series, though, I felt like does a great job because it's like you don't see Aladdin like as Sultan, or you don't really see him with Jasmine after they're married. Like you don't really see a lot of adventures. So the
Well,
TV series,
that was actually the reason for Return of Jafar,
mm,
which frankly I have problems with. I haven't watched it in a long time, and I actually don't own it on any media. I'd have to watch it on Disney Plus.
mm,
Uh, and I don't downplay it anymore because I've had too many people saying, "Oh, I love that movie. I watch it over and over again."
uh,
Okay, but I mean, it was supposed to be four parts of of a story, but the my feeling was I don't think kids are going to want to watch a show about a rich married couple. I
right.
mean, yeah, they could still have, and you could do it. It's all a matter of design, and you still have to have great adventures. But but there's two things I wanted to do. I wanted them not to get married, and I wanted Iago as part of the team because if you
Mm,
look at the original movie, if you take away the genie, because obviously everybody remembers Robin Williams, Iago is hilarious. He's
yes.
also the smartest one. All the good ideas come from the bird, and he was just so conniving and all that. He was, I said I won him because I was thinking in terms of a team that we were going to
Mm,
have Abu and Aladdin and Carpet and Genie and Jasmine often. I need the bird in there to be like the sand, the grit there that and the guy you can't trust,
Right.
the Dr. Smith of Lost in Space.
Mhm.
So anyway, those are the things I wanted to set up, and that was the excuse to tell this rambling story, out of that. Our
Mhm.
second movie, Aladdin the King of Thieves, was
Yes.
more okay. We want to up our game and let's do a story for for this, and
They're
that one to
finally
me
getting
had
married.
more heart. Yeah, exactly. Then we could marry him off. Yeah.
Right. No, I had that one on VHS as well. The things that stick in your head, like follow the trail of the 40 thieves. Your father's trapped beyond the world. I don't know why that is still just
Huh.
stands out. Just,
Yeah.
but anyway, um, yeah, no. So yeah, I love the Aladdin animated series. Even like what I've seen of the Little Mermaid animated series, I'm like, this works. Like, just keep telling adventures. And maybe it's just speaks to just kind of the greatness of the characters that Disney creates.
Yeah.
You
I
just
mean, I
want to
was
see
very
more of
self-conscious about, and I suppose we can get back to Darkwing soon, but
them.
I was very self-conscious of Aladdin because, again, I shared an office with Ron Clements, and I
Mhm.
thought Aladdin is a fantastic movie. It's full animation.
Mhm.
And here I'm going into it, and with, not even a tenth of the budget, this minuscule budget, I'm going to have to tell stories at a blinding rate as far as turning out scripts and all that. And, I kind of ran it. I need the blessing of Ron and John, who were friends of mine,
Mhm.
but just, and they had no problem with it. In fact, when Return to Jafar made a ton of a ton of money,
Mhm.
like movie scale money, uh, we got a bonus over at TV Animation, and they divided it up smartly or not. They divided up so everybody got something, and
Mhm.
those of us who were at the core of it got more. But some
Mhm.
people got, I think, like $50, which, as instead of being a reward, they looked at the box office of the tape, and
Right.
basically it would just piss them off.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, I told them how much I got, real self conscious of it, and their reaction was, "You got ripped off," because, and that kind of made me stand back because it's like if I had been a live action director and I did a sequel, even a crummy sequel to a successful movie
Mhm.
that made as much money as Return of Jafar did and only cost as much as Return of Jafar, I would have a 7 picture deal and probably a Ferrari given to me as a gift sitting in my driveway.
Wow.
So when you put it in that perspective, you go, yeah, maybe maybe I did get ripped off. Not that I went and asked for more money. I just
Mhm.
remember uh, talking to the head of animation was Gary Kreisel, and he's really the reason why TV animation on the business side existed and became stronger. It was Gary being there and frankly, being cheap. He treated Disney money like it was his money.
Mhm.
Um, and I kind of paraphrased, a line out of Ghostbusters because when he told us, "Oh, we're getting these bonuses. We have this much to spread," and he said, they asked me, "Is this enough money?" And he said it was. And I just looked at him and I said, "Gary, when they ask you if it's enough money, you say no." No, but it was like, and he looked at me. It was so foreign to him to act that way, but it was like, they wanted to give you more money. They wanted to give us more money.
Right.
And that's why they loved him. He ran a very tight ship. And
Mhm.
on the other hand, when it came to renaming Darkwing, I was shocked that Gary put up $500 in 1990 money, um, which is probably close to 900 in our money, as a contest. Whoever named the duck would, you know, get that prize. And I was like, we got a name out of it from Alan Burnett, who of course did the animated Batman. Um, and it wasn't even close. It was like Darkwing and a bunch of trash. It was
Wow.
like nothing even close. It wasn't even like, well, give me the top 5 names. It was like, no, I pointed to it and I said, that's it. Darkwing is the character he thinks he is, but
Mhm.
I'm putting Duck with it because it makes it sound silly, which is closer to who he really is. Um, and it wasn't even, there was nothing that even anyone would dare bring up as an alternate, you know.
Right.
Not that everybody had fun, but it was just like you look back at it and you go, oh yeah, Nightwing. Who didn't think of that? So,
Right. No, that's awesome. So, Darkwing starts out as a pitch, and you're developing it as Double O Duck.
yeah.
Um, and it does have to get renamed because Ian Fleming's estate's like, now we've got Double O locked up.
Specifically, it was the guys who owned the rights. It was the movie people. Cubby Broccoli was the name of the producer, did tons of those Bond pictures.
Mm,
So it was the movie guys who opened up Variety, and here was a double page spread announcing Double O Duck. And
mm,
they let like little things slide, like an episode of DuckTales called Double
mm,
O Ducks. But they were trying to reinvigorate the Bond series, and to see they're saying no one's going to take it seriously, or at
yeah.
least there's a danger of that. We don't want somebody goofing on it while we're trying to make it grittier than it used to be or whatever. So yeah, we lost the name, and then mentally that helped me because it really got me away from the spy stuff, even though we had already drifted from spies into pulp heroes.
Mm,
But and I ended smack dab in the comics of my youth, even before Marvel Comics, the Silver Age of comics and
mm,
early Marvel comics were one and dones. Even
yeah.
early Marvel, they were just one story per issue.
Hmm.
Um, and you knew the basic continuity, but it didn't really matter. You knew that, yeah, Lois Lane, Clark Kent, Perry White. I know those guys. I know the relationships. Uh, but every story, any story you could pick up, and they never explained hard things like how did the Joker get out of prison. They didn't matter.
Right.
All it knows is no matter how many of these crazy criminals Batman defeats and locks up, they're going to be free. Anytime the writers want to bring them back, that they're not going to explain it. That, well, he had a really good lawyer. No, they're just going to be there robbing a bank on a giant typewriter or something.
Right. And so, um, well, with that, I guess walk us through like the idea of Darkwing Duck and how we land on, what we all know now.
Well, he started out as Double O Duck, straight James Bond parody.
Mm,
That did not fly with Jeffrey. Jeffrey wanted, first of all, the biggest thing it missed was Disney Heart.
okay.
Uh, and we came up with the idea of what if he had a little girl they had to raise? It's going to be an obstacle. And what if that little girl refused to stay at home because the personality I wanted was Calvin, out of Calvin and Hobbes,
Mm,
in little girl form, which solved the question of why did Batman think he needed a 9-year-old kid in bright clothes to help him fight crime?
right.
Didn't make a lot of sense, but I picked up comics. I just accepted it was Batman and Robin.
Right.
But this way, it's like, no, she was not supposed to come along. Sometimes Darkwing, obviously off screen, had already given up and she was just there. Other times it was like, oh no, he's tried to leave her back. Um, anyway, so that gave us the heart. We knew that no, he has to raise this little girl. He can kind of move to suburbia to help because the little girl has to go to school and all that. That complicates all the stuff. He needs to do more in a more flamboyant way. Um, it was the early visual of him was just, and you've probably seen it online. It just looks like Donald Duck in a white tuxedo, except with
Mm,
this bandana mask, a cape, and a hat. And we were brainstorming one day. I just called in a lot of the guys who would eventually be my story editors on the project. And the nice thing is they were already either staff story editors or staff writers, meaning they weren't assigned to any one show.
mm,
So you could make use of that. I mean, Greg called me in to talk about gargoyles once. In this case, I called in a bunch of the guys who I wanted to eventually work on the show. It was Dwayne Capizzi who did, he had done Alf, then did Jackie Chan Adventures, Men in Black, Rusty and Big Guy, and I think currently is doing Transformers series.
mm.
Anyway, Dwayne looked at this guy in a tuxedo and mask, and he said, "This looks more like doesn't look like a spy. It looks like the old pulp heroes, like the Shadow and Green Hornet." And that was like, yeah, it does. That was amazing, and it
Mm,
it gave us a different template. Notably, Doc Savage, and I knew this stuff from being a comics fan. kind of crossed with science fiction fandom and old pulp fandom. So I had heard, Shadow radio shows or Green Hornet radio shows on tape, or read like a Doc Savage story in paperback form. Doc Savage had a group of experts that he worked with, and they were all super eccentric characters. I mean, one of the scientists literally looked like a Neanderthal man, and he was constantly with this uptight Englishman that they constantly squabble with each other. But that was, you could tell they would die for each other at the same time. And I said, that gives us a different template to use instead of Q and Moneypenny and the 00 stuff. Ultimately, and Launchpad was always in the background. It was kind of like having Fonzie as a guest star or something like that. But he could be, the transportation guy. Anyway, the problem was we had too many characters. They were great for a long time. Darkwing was, 00 was teamed with a short guy in a bowler hat. I remember, I don't know why, but that's who we picked out of this group. It was just too many people in a 22-minute episode. The more people you have, the harder it is to service each of them and still move the story along. So we trimmed and trimmed and trimmed. We knew we were always going to have, Drake and Goslin. But then it was like, it came down to Launchpad. We need somebody I want him to have a plane and all of that. It's like he serves multiple purposes. And really the idea of that many experts back at headquarters, really that would just keep the story from going forward, because to give them any comedy or any setup, you would take all of Act 1 or something. Right. So we pared it down that way. Then, like I say, when we lost the name, it had already started shifting toward comics. And with the idea of Batman and the Flash both having fantastic rogues galleries, and Spider-Man too, for that matter, that started me down that road and embracing that in a big way. And specifically, Silver Age, Golden Age to a certain extent, but Silver Age Batman is when he had Bat everything, not just the Batarangs. He had, and Bat Hound. He had a Batmobile, obviously, Bat copters, Bat plane, Bat boat, and all that. So Darkwing was supposed to have. He had the Ratcatcher, which was a Judge Dredd motorcycle, which ended up less like Judge Dredd once we put a duckbill on it. The Thunderquack, of course, is plane. And he actually was going to have a boat called the Wave Shredder. And that's why St. Canard has a river going around it. So he could use this boat, which we never did. But, those other things, were fine enough. So that was directly out of the whole idea that Batman had his face on everything. Because those Silver Age and even the end of the Golden Age, that's when he had a big bat face on the head of the car. It was this big, sleek car. The closest thing is, I think, Bruce Timm's in the animated series, with a big single fin on the back hood, and this big bat face in the front. So it's just he had a lot of trademark, lawsuits going on to keep his trademark there. So Darkwing was the same way. I wanted to keep that. The other thing I wanted from the Shadow was, I love the weed of crime bears bitter fruit. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow does. And then he would laugh, echoing. And I thought, that's what I want from Darkwing. I want him to have this, he'll come out of smoke, have this echoing laugh. So it used to be Darkwing would only say one thing. He'd say, I'm the terror that flaps in the night. I'm the winged scourge that pecks at your nightmares. I am Darkwing Duck. And then I told the story a lot recently. Just a few scripts later, we had a script called Double Darkwings, and Launchpad had to masquerade as Darkwing. And the gag was he always got the line wrong. And it was so hilarious. Again, the way I viewed the show is, I'm not going to, a foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds, they say. Anyway, it's like, this is too good to remain just a gag in this episode. Let's give it to Darkwing. We rewrote the early scripts. We re-recorded the lines to give that to Darkwing, which is what everybody loves about that whole thing. And the fact that Launchpad was actually getting the lines right then in that show, it's like, yes,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't as funny, but doesn't matter. Look what we got out of it.
Right.
Same with Negaduck. Negaduck was created. I love Negaduck. And I said, bring him back. And I don't care what his origin is.
Mm.
We won't say anything about it. Let's just bring the character back. And, again, the Silver Age of comics is very strong because the reason why Negaduck is yellow, black, and red is because the Reverse Flash was yellow, black, and red. I grew up with him. That's the epitome of an evil version of a hero. And there was no other explanation of that. It was just like, those are evil colors. Come on.
Right. Nice.
So anyway, and by that time we're up and going, and we're just doing all sorts of things. My favorite stuff was always, I wrote an initial script that showed how wild we could go, and that was that sinking feeling with Moriarty. And in the third act, in the climax, they're in a baseball park. Suddenly, they're all wearing baseball uniforms, and we didn't explain where they came from. And that was, I regret not, when that episode came back, I should have every once in a while showed it to the team again to just make them realize, no, we can go farther. You can really break rules on this for the sake of the gag and contain it. And who knows what the rules are? You'll know it when you see it.
Right.
But to me, the crazier episodes are the ones I like the most. That one where you have lost in a world of modern art paintings, and they're running from painting to painting. Ones where people are typing up a comic book story, and we're seeing the adventure that changes depending on who's at the typewriter writing the script. Twin Peaks, which was our parody of Twin Peaks. Those are all the crazy episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And what I loved about Darkwing as a kid was it felt like, I don't know, there was like classic Disney, because you would see that like in reruns, or that'd be what you watched at school, like when the teachers wanted to play a movie that was safe. So we watched like old Mickey or Donald and Goofy and stuff like that. And it was like, that was very clearly different than like the Looney Tunes and stuff that was playing on Cartoon Network and stuff around the same time. But Darkwing feels like it's got classic Disney and some Looney Tunes, and like the gags, the timing, the quick humor, like it just worked for me.
Well, again, when I was growing up, Disney held on to their short subjects. They did not release them to television except on the Mickey Mouse Club. You'd have, and you're way too young to remember, but they'd do this Miska Muska Mouseketeer, time for this one, whatever how it was, but they would show one cartoon per show. And I guess it was a Monday through Friday show. And that was it. Meanwhile, Warner Brothers said, we have all these cartoons, give us money and we'll let you show them. So I grew up on classic Warner Brothers cartoons, Daffy Duck, Bugs Bunny, the earliest Bugs Bunnies. And even because different packages went to different, studios or networks, the lunchtime show in LA, Sheriff John would show cartoons that even were silent cartoons. I didn't realize till later that, no, that was a silent cartoon that had someone put a soundtrack to so they could sell it to television. So I saw Coco the Clown out of the Inkwell was one of the earliest, cartoons, and precursors to all the Warner Brothers stuff. There was Bosco. There was, what did he become? He became Billy or whatever, they changed him. But all the stuff, while the, Porky Pig when he was still huge and fat before he became shorter and cuter. So I had all that background, all the Fleischer weird stuff. I still have visual memories of this one where these guys are running away from the Sphinx in Egypt. And it's just this putting two claws out and running with an animated background going back while its eyes were swirling around, just nightmarish stuff. But definitely my cartoon humor came out of those years because that's what was on TV. I didn't get to see a bunch of Disney shorts really until I started work at Disney, and they would show us a half hour's worth there, once a month or, whatever. And we could check things out and put them on our own Moviola to examine stuff. So yeah, a lot of that is in Darkwing. It's basically Short's sensibilities. Certainly, there was Disney stuff that was fanciful too,
Mhm.
um, and plenty of, especially Ward Kimball pulling off certain gags. Um, but all that was what I wanted in Darkwing, that kind of craziness.
And no, you definitely achieved that. So I have to ask this because I have to imagine that much like the name Darkwing, there couldn't have even been a follow-up pitch, right? The theme song, I don't know who decides that, but I just can't imagine a world where there's like 7 drafts of that theme song that were even in contention.
There was the way they did those things, Rescue Rangers, even more than Darkwing, is the potential payoff for a composer, a lyricist, selling a theme song that was going to play every day is huge.
Hmm.
And because of that, they would get submissions just for free. And these things would be not just because of synthesizers, but, guys are going to put more into their demos to really make them sound finished. So actually, with Rescue Rangers, there were a handful that, oh, I could see going that way. In
Hmm.
fact, the one that I liked the most was we ended up buying the music rights to, because when the Rescue Rangers go into action, like on the Ranger plane or something, you'll hear dun 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 dun. That's
Hmm.
actually from a theme song that we didn't pick. I liked it at the time because it was the straightest. It sounded like something you would march to, and I thought that was just funny when you're talking about 2 inch high characters and all that.
Hmm.
But again, Jeffrey Katzenberg and Gary Kreisel had started in the music company at Disney. Um, they had their beaks wet by that DuckTales, callback.
Yeah.
The woohoo was the phantom that walked the halls. And that ended up being the Chippendale
Yeah.
uh, to get that kind of hiccup. And what I liked about Darkwing is Darkwing didn't have that.
Yeah.
It was an awesome song. I loved the sax. Um, but it didn't have that same kind of gimmick. It was just really good. I mean, in some
Hmm.
ways, Let's Get Dangerous in the center of it
Yeah.
was that gimmick. But no, I just thought it was great. So at the same time, there were other things that were pitched, but I don't remember. And so I had not as many were submitted as Rescue Rangers. Um, but I did have a cassette tape of all these different ones, so you could be constantly listening to them. And I don't remember having a second follow up. I just
Mm.
thought, well, that was really good. Now, again, I was not, to me, it's like, and probably foolishly so, I wasn't worried about getting the perfect theme song, because the right one really does have an effect on your show. It was like,
Yeah.
I have all this to worry about. And these people, the head of the music department and my boss, and all these people are going to have, and ultimately Jeffrey and Michael are going to pick the final one. I'm just going
Hmm.
to stay out of the way. But hearing that one, it's like, yeah, I really like that. I wasn't going to give detailed notes on it or anything. I just thought it was a great pick. It had been, if it had been something that for some reason I thought was truly awful, yes, I would say something and fight for anything. Um, but you know, we had talented people in the music department. Talented. My boss was a talented person as far as recognizing music and seeing things. So I was real happy with it. I just think it was awesome.
Yeah. No, it's great. The DuckTales theme song is great. Chippendale is great. Yeah, it's had a great run of theme
Yeah.
songs. Um, man. But anyway, yeah, I couldn't let this interview pass without asking about the theme song because it's just so iconic to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so again, I do want to remind people because, well, now you've probably got 4 hours left to back this campaign. Uh, but if you go to comicsaredope.com/darkwing, you will find Dynamite's Kickstarter for these 3 collections. You can get them in trade paperbacks, you can get them in hardcovers, which are oversized, so like omnibus sized hardcovers. And you can even get like more limited with metal effects and all sorts of stuff going on. There's art prints, there's all sorts of things that you can get. for backing this campaign. You can even get like a really cool box set. Like there's a lot there.
There's
Commission
original.
works.
If you really got money to burn, there's original art where you can get 4 sketch covers that go together to do one image.
Wow.
That's like some awesome stuff. You see, I don't go to the comic store each week anymore. I
Mhm.
Every once in a while I'll go and buy something, but pretty regularly I will find something on Kickstarter that I want to support the artist, whether they need it or not. I got the Arthur Adams collection recently.
Mhm.
I got, and to me, what I always do is you jump on a Kickstarter, you can get these things, and usually they're going to be more expensive once they're out in the real world.
Yes.
That this is the price you want to get it at. And, at the very least, I would say, get the Darkwing softcover collections,
Yeah.
because then you've got them there, you're not chasing separate issues all around. You've got the stories collected, and they put together a beautiful package, I think.
Absolutely. So you got time, a little bit of time. So just hurry over, right? Maybe open it in a new tab while you're listening to this. But yeah, the Kickstarter is really awesome. When Dynamite announced it, they gave me the pleasure of announcing the Kickstarter on the channel. And I was very excited because I don't know how it came up, but we'd been talking about Darkwing for a while. Um, but anyway, I was just so excited to see Darkwing in these new iterations. The Justice Duck series is great. The Darkwing series is great. Negaduck is great. And I'm glad they're even reaching back and going in the archives and grabbing some classic stuff that I hadn't ever seen. What's it been like for you, right, to be in the sort of the writer's room, create this thing with, your team and see it live on for as long as it has?
Um, well, here's the thing I have to correct. It's a minor thing, but we didn't have a writer's room. In fact, when I went and visited the guys on DuckTales 2017, one of the first things one of the writers asked me is, "How big was your writer's room?" And I practically did a spit take. I said, "We didn't have a writer's room. People ran into my office. They'd pitch me a story. We'd go back and forth and argue, and then come up with something. They'd go back and write it up, and boom, we then
Wow.
did that." There was the idea that we're going to get together a few months early and we're going to map out this arc and weave the secondary character, and then that arc will come to the top. And then it's like, no, it was more like, we got to get something out.
Right.
So that was our feeling. But having said all that, obviously in my talk here, you see how my love of those early comic books when comics were simpler, and
Mhm.
hey, I bought in big to Marvel Comics and, had complete sets of Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and Iron Man and Avengers. Um, you know, so I appreciated all the soap opera and continuity that came along. But that early crazy time of the early Marvels and all the DC stuff, you can see that Darkwing taps in on that. So the fact that it came back, and this is like, well, aside from the early stuff, Boom Studios took a shot at it, and Joe Books kind of continued that on. And then what Dynamite has done is really committed to it, not just with one book, with 3 books,
Mhm.
and the knowledgeable comic writers that they brought onto it. Jeff Parker, who does Negaduck, actually um, worked on Rusty and Big Guy, the animated series. So he started in storyboard cleanup.
Mhm.
And Dwayne Capizzi, that guy I mentioned as being, the guy who said, "Hey, I think it's more like the Shadow and the Green Hornet." He was Jeff's boss at one point, basically, because he was the producer on that show that Jeff was working on.
Wow,
So all the circles coming back.
man.
But anyway, I couldn't foresee any of that. The fact that this much in the future that Darkwing would still be seen in comic form, and of course, it's still being developed as a possible series. So fingers crossed on that one.
Man, the Seth Rogen's team's doing that, right?
Yeah, and I point out to people, they're the guys. It's Point Grey Pictures. They did Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Mutant Mayhem, the last
Hmm.
movie out. That was so good. I
It
mean,
was
just
awesome.
it was so, it's like one of those things that was staring you in the face and nobody saw it, that let's write them as if they really are teenagers, as
Right.
opposed to superheroes that were just calling teenagers and saying they like pizza a lot. um, that was brilliant. It looked brilliant. And now the 2D version, which I think is a series coming out late summer. I've
Mm.
seen the trailer online for that. That looks great. So I'm just hoping, look, Point Grey had the taste to steer whoever was the creative team on that into that direction, or give the right feedback. My hope is they're doing the same for Darkwing Goslin and Launchpad.
I would hope so, man, because I need to see it. I thought when they did the Darkwing cameos in the DuckTales reboot, I was like, oh, it's got to be like right around the corner. Any
Yeah.
day now, they're gonna announce this series they've been working on.
Well, if those guys had gotten it their way, that's exactly what would have happened. I mean,
Mm,
those guys actually did an entire Darkwing presentation, and then we're told to, oh, we're now going to do something more limited, and they rejiggered it for that. But ultimately, and this is like Disney. Actually, I don't know whether it was Disney Channel management or Disney Plus management, or whatever. But it was out of their. They were saying, no, we're going to actually put it out there to other people.
mm,
But yeah, that you and everybody else thought that was going right along. So whatever they do, okay. Again, I haven't seen anything in a long time, but
mm.
I would I would be shocked to the point of a heart attack if they actually continued what they did in DuckTales, 2017.
Hmm.
Whatever they come up with will be as fresh as the various versions of you know the turtles that have you can tell that, oh, they did. Or it's like the Spider-Man thing. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
here's the Toby Spider-Mans, here's the Andrew Garfield and all of that. We'll see. This one will start out fresh and they'll make their own ground rules, and here's hoping.
And with that hoping, what's the one thing that you say is essential to Darkwing? Like if they don't do this, then they haven't captured it.
I would say the relationship of Darkwing and Goslin,
Mm,
and to a lesser extent Launchpad, but father and daughter. um, I know I've told this story a lot over the years, but again, I shared a room with Ron Clemens. Glenn Keane came in 3 months after me, one of the top animators of all time.
mm.
They could go into any movie theater playing Little Mermaid or Aladdin and hear audience reactions. We had ratings that came out much later than air that told us, oh, it's being successful. Somebody's watching it. I
Mm.
did not get fan reaction until I retired and was invited as a guest to, a convention. And suddenly people were saying, especially women were coming up and in tears explaining to me how much that relationship meant to them, because they had a rough upbringing with, you know, either a dad missing or a dad being abusive or whatever.
Mm.
And that happened 3 times in the same convention, three different
Wow.
people. Um, and then I continued, had stories like that, not as drastic, but just people who said, man, that meant a lot to me.
Mm.
It was that family at the center. So to me, that's what they need to hold on to. We used to, after the fact, we described it as, what if Batman had a little girl who refused to stay home?
Mm.
If you've got that, you've got the essence of Darkwing.
Man. Yeah. Well, no, yeah, I love Goslin, especially like
Yeah,
in the Dybert series, like that whole bit, even just in the first issue, where it's like she wants a phone, and he's like, no. They go
yeah,
through all of this for him to eventually come around, but just Goslin always wanting to leave the nest or prove her independence, and Drake trying to keep her under his thumb
yeah.
is just it's great. And maybe I'm just sentimental because I got daughters, but
Well, you know what? The other thing is, Amanda was about 9 years old when Darkwing came out. She has a
mm,
9-year-old daughter. So for
mm,
homework, she had to watch all the Darkwing. She watched it with her daughter.
mm,
So she's tapped into, that parenting part and can, caricature it and have fun with it. I think that came natural to her.
yeah. For sure. So one last reminder for you guys, go to comicsaredope.com/Darkwing. You can back the Darkwing Duck Kickstarter. You can grab one or more of the trade paperbacks. You can grab the whole set of three. You can move up to the hardcovers or even the limited edition hardcovers. They've unlocked stretch goals. The campaign crossed 300,000 today. So they just announced that anybody who orders at the print level will get a free exclusive 5x7 acetate animation style cell. Which now I'm like, I gotta get something so I can get this cell. There's already other things coming out, like there's an ash can for a new Darkwing Duck series coming. And I believe you did the cover for that, right?
Yeah, I did.
So
In fact,
there.
I do covers for, the whole series. I don't
Oh
They
wow,
haven't actually announced that, but they announced the ash can, so I'm blowing it.
man,
I'm
that's
revealing it, which
that's exciting.
drove me nuts. Although some of the covers came out really sweet. It was one of those things I finished and went, "Wow, this worked out."
I've been looking at the I think you did some art like for auction. You posted on your Blue Sky, and I'm like, man, I gotta get in on one of these. Those are really good, man. So yeah, back the campaign. Tad, thank you so much for your time. I know you've had a long circuit for these interviews,
Yeah.
but I really appreciate you talking to us, and I'm excited about more Darkwing coming. So thank you again.
So, thank you, and stay dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. We're gonna stay dangerous. Uh, all right. Well, now that I've lost all composure, you guys stay safe, stay awesome, and read something dope today. Peace.